Possibly one of the most hated and critically derided episodes in all of Doctor Who's history is the 2006 episode Fear Her, written by Matthew Graham. However, despite the disastrous response to his Doctor Who debut, Graham was invited back for Series 3 and Series 5, before finally securing a full commission in Series 6. Showrunner Stephen Moffat wanted a two-part story combining elements from the recent blockbuster Avatar and the cult classic movie The Thing. This led to the episodes The Rebel Flesh and The Almost People, where the Doctor and his companions arrive at a valuable acid factory in the near future where artificial humans are remotely piloted to do all the work. This story is an important part of the wider Series 6 story arc by providing answers to mysteries and segueing into the climactic mid-series finale. But does it actually hold up on its own and justify its extended length? Or is it a dull affair wasting its brilliant premise and concepts? Well, grab your officially licensed flesh goo pods and get comfy, because it's time to review The Rebel Flesh and The Almost People.
Now why don't you stand back and let us impress you?
The cold open does a very good job establishing the setting, telling you all you need to know. It shows the monastery, the supporting cast, their jobs, and most importantly, it introduces the idea of the flesh avatars. I really like the tone of the scene as Buzzer seemingly dies. All his co-workers are so casual about it all, which feels so weird. There's a brilliant dissonance to the events on screen and the dialogue of characters. Everyone just completely no-selling this horrific acid-based death, and if anything, they consider it a minor annoyance and worry more about the cost of the suit being destroyed. It establishes a strange and unconventional environment whilst perfectly showing how the gangers work and what they're used for in the universe. It's a great opening that sets so much up right off the bat, feeling suitably Doctor Who-y with its concepts. Even the acid suits and big staffs look really industrial and futuristic, creating a brilliant sci-fi visual. The whole setting has this great contrast between the old ruins and all the pipes and machines of the contemporary factory. It's the last place on Earth you'd expect a heavily industrial facility like this to be housed, almost breaking an unspoken rule of protecting holy sites. It even kind of works thematically, given that the story is all about the sanctity of life and the validity of the gangers' birth, especially because they were born without conception. Like Jesus himself.
Well, I can see why you keep it in a church. Miracle of life.
One of the best Classic Who features that the modern show rarely uses is using the TARDIS as a living space. In the original run of the show, we often got to see the Doctor and the companions hanging out in the console room playing chess between adventures, or even spending time in their own bedrooms. And even though it was a soft reboot, the TV movie still used this idea, making the console room a homely living space where the Doctor could relax during a long flight. Using the TARDIS in these ways always made it feel like a proper home base for these characters. However, during the Davis era, the TARDIS was pretty much just used as a time and space machine to get the characters from point A to point B. There weren't even any doorways in the design, so you never got the sense that these characters spent any significant time there when they weren't using it to travel. Rebel Flesh, on the other hand, is one of the first proper times we get to see this in the modern show. Amy and Rory stand there playing darts while showing off their superior music taste by listening to Muse. It's a fun scene, giving you that important glimpse at downtime to remind you that these characters' lives aren't always wacky adventures in time and space. They do take breaks to hang out and relax, just like everyone else in the world. However, a solar tsunami disrupts the relaxation and our protagonists arrive at a monastery in the 22nd century, seemingly by accident, but we'll get to that later. They're quickly accosted by the locals in typical Doctor Who fashion, psychic paper and all. I like the exchange between the Doctor and boss Miranda Cleaves. Raquel Cassidy does a great job with the dry humour, whilst also feeling like the kind of boss you can both respect and have a laugh with, but also absolutely despise. It all just depends on what day it is. Possibly my favourite part of the early stages of this episode is this short back and forth.
I need to see your critical systems.
Which one?
You know which one.
The Doctor always has a knack for saying the right thing at the right time, and moments like this showcase that. By placing themselves in a position of authority, they can coax other people into answering their own questions. He doesn't know what she's talking about, so he just pretends to, and she does the rest of the work for him, which is a common tactic the Doctor uses, and I always love to see it because it does such a great job at infiltrating wherever they end up, all by pretending to know more than they do. Like in The Long Game, where he pretends to be an inspector, so the supporting cast have to explain everything to him like he's an idiot so they don't feel like they're gonna fail. Cleves then takes the protagonist to see the Flesh, the focus of the episode based on the titular avatars from the 2009 movie. I absolutely adore the concept of the Flesh, programmable matter allowing for the immediate cloning of living beings. Like we see through the unsettling creation of Jennifer's ganger, it just grows a perfect copy, even down to the exact same memories, which begs the question of whether putting a dictator in there would also make the ganger responsible for their crimes.
He actually did it, but this guy did it in his thoughts and in his mind.
No,
That's
that's
how he perceived it. Do anything. Still a bad guy.
The Flesh kind of reminds me of the Martha clone in the Santaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky, especially because their duplicate died when the real Martha left her harnessy thing, although she wasn't exactly controlling her duplicate. It's never been revealed that these are both the Flesh, but I like to believe it is because of the similarities. And as evidenced by these kinds of similarities, cloning has always been a mainstay in the science fiction landscape for obvious reasons. It's one of the pinnacles of science, this godlike ability to completely replicate an entire living being right down to the exact same cells and DNA. There have been many real-world attempts over the years, and each one has sparked the imagination of writers. Sure, you could write about androids with human memories, but clones tend to be humans with other humans' memories. It's consistently interesting and always brings up the morality and ethics of cloning. It's a lab-grown, artificial being, but does it qualify as a sentient life form deserving of its own rights? It's a fascinating debate, something also tackled in New Earth, where lab-grown human-like beings were used as experiments despite having their own thoughts and emotions. Funnily enough, they were called Flesh too, which makes it kind of fitting that this two-parter adopts the same moral question. Yes, the gangers in the Rebel Flesh are duplicates of the human workers, being used like forklifts due to the danger of the acid. They're seen as disposable tools, only functioning as long as the humans are in a harness piloting them. It's kind of like using a VR headset for your job. Therefore, it's a daunting moment as an exciting and frantic sequence sees another solar storm hit, causing a massive power surge that gives all the gangers sentience independent of their human originals. There are these flashes of the gangers in their flesh state and it looks really creepy. It's a very unsettling moment designed to set the eerie and paranoid tone of the story, because it shows you this monstrous ganger design and positions them as villains. These are previously disposable avatars, but now they're their own people with their own thoughts and motivations. Even if they aren't out and out monsters or villains, it's still a creepy thing to think about because they have newfound autonomy despite being duplicates of people who are still alive and sharing the same setting. Indeed, the individuality of the gangers is the central theme of the two-parter, with the Doctor immediately flagging up the morality and ethics as soon as he is introduced to the Flesh. Because, after all, this is the Doctor. They always believe sentient beings have the right to live, even if they're antagonistic. After the duplicates gain sentience, the humans are shocked and refuse to acknowledge them as people, but the Doctor supports their rights as individuals, lending an important sense of nuance. The gangers aren't innately evil creatures. They're not trying to take over the world and populate it with other clones. Matthew Graham wanted the audience to be scared of the gangers, but also relate to them and understand their struggle, which scenes like this help to communicate. The Doctor is usually the voice of reason and morality in the show, so if he's supporting their right to live, then so should the audience. The story uses the main character to lend credibility to the gangers' fight for individuality. The humans are all paranoid and suspicious, but only Cleves is being evil and antagonistic, the others are simply ignorant. To them, this is like saying a screwdriver or a hammer has as much of a right to live as a human does, which would always confuse them. They don't know any better, so it's important to drive that point home whilst also validating the gangers through the Doctor himself. An interesting thing that this story explores is the use of the real when it comes to differentiating between gangers and humans. Sure, the humans were the originals which the Flesh used as templates, but the gangers are completely identical copies in every way. So they do kind of have a point when they claim they're the real versions too. Because what dictates real in this context? Jennifer's ganger has the same scared and lonely childhood, Jimmy's ganger has the same son as his human counterpart, and Cleves' ganger shares her blood clot. There is nothing setting these entities apart besides the way they were conceived. One is from natural birth and the other is from artificial cloning. That's it though, they are both legitimate humans and the story does a good job delving deep into this concept, providing arguments for and against the ideas of individuality.
My name is Jennifer Lucas. I'm not a factory part.
They are unequivocally the same people, which is constantly proven as their gangers can correctly predict what the humans will do, since they can just think about what they themselves would do.
I'm typing it in case they're listening in.
Oof,
See how smart I am?
The Cleves ganger is even able to correctly guess the code word her human counterpart put in place for the evac shuttle, which is another clever way to show that these are the same person. There is actually an interesting contrast, as the human Cleves is more of an antagonist, but the ganger Cleves is a lot more sympathetic and peaceful in comparison.
I just want to be left to live in peace, Jen.
Even though this is the same person, they approach the situation in different ways, further proving their gangers' rights as individuals. One of the emotional cores of the individuality debate comes in the form of Jimmy, since the Doctor calls his son Adam on his birthday, providing Jimmy's ganger with the opportunity to talk to him, because he is still Adam's dad. This completely changes his view and makes the gangers turn against Jen, because they just want to live normal lives. Jimmy's ganger is immediately given this opportunity, since the human Jimmy is killed by the acid, accepting his ganger with his dying words and telling him to be the dad he knows he is. But don't worry, he's not really dead, he'll just regenerate. It's a strong turning point for the battle, proving that both Jimmys are legitimate, something capped off as the Doctor reunites their ganger Jimmy with Adam. He also takes Cleves to the company to begin the long process of holding them accountable for their use of the flesh and demand both ganger rights and the end of the technology entirely, since the company has just been throwing gangers on a pile to rot despite them still being alive, leading to an unironic "the humans were the monsters all along."
How could they?
Who are the real monsters?
I know it would have been an Osgood situation 2 years early, but this whole ending would be massively improved if both Cleves had made it through the story to fight the battle together.
Make what you say in that room count.
Cleves and her ganger counterpart had very different opinions, so having them reconcile and stand together would be a lot more satisfying and powerful, driving the point home that both these people have the same right to live and representing the path they have to walk together. But instead, the surviving ganger is the least developed part of the cast. Neither him nor his human really had any presence in the story, which kind of lessens the strength of the ganger rights ending. The gangers weren't just inspired by Avatar, they were also influenced by the cult classic 80s horror movie The Thing, where a group of scientists are terrorized by a shape-changing alien trying to kill them all one by one. Yes, that's where Among Us came from. There, I said it, alright? Due to this inspiration, the rebel flesh and the almost people both adopt an atmosphere of mistrust, because people aren't always who they say they are. The humans can infiltrate the gangers, and the gangers can infiltrate the humans, even unknowingly, as the Doctor reveals in a genius moment, heating up a plate that Cleves has no reaction to because she's actually a ganger, despite seconds earlier refusing their existence because she genuinely believed she was the original. It's almost exactly like the blood scene in The Thing, testing people to see whether they're actually who they're claiming to be. But rather than trying to expose the gangers, the Doctor is simply trying to help them understand and embrace their own identities, which is another good use of him. However, because they're not stabilised yet, Cleves lashes out and becomes a bit evil. I really don't like that the gangers are immediately evil. There's never really a first shot from either side justifying the war. The gangers and the humans are both hostile immediately, like it skipped a scene or something. Obviously ganger Cleves was there to hear everything, but she herself was saying those things, so surely she'd be able to understand why they're paranoid, rather than immediately wanting all humans to die. For a story that wants to emphasise the sympathetic struggle of the gangers, it makes them pretty unreasonably angry and vengeful without clear justification, which ends up feeling a bit contradictory. It does make sense for Jennifer to be an antagonist though, because she's a radical extremist. In early drafts, she was written as having a perfect memory recall, and this still comes through to an extent because she remembers every single ganger death she has ever experienced, hence her reluctance to use them at the beginning. She has felt every death in detail, so it makes sense that she would want revenge and to cause an uprising. But her motivations always seem muddled, and her status as a villain isn't helped by her absolutely comically bad CGI. The normal flesh visuals are decent, this milky white veiny material kind of like her eyeballs, but Jennifer is something else. She kind of ends up like Elastigirl, this goofy villain stretching out her limbs and unhinging her jaw like she's made out of rubber or something. It's so bizarre and tonally off, especially when she becomes a big Lazarus Experiment style monster chasing after everyone else. It just looks shockingly bad and low budget, especially when you see how amazing a lot of other effects in Series 6 are. I understand it's meant to have some level of uncanny valley creepiness, but it doesn't look bad in a grotesque, scary way. It just looks incredibly dated and goofy. You can't take her seriously as a threat, and she doesn't even need to be like this for the narrative to work. Until her descent into a typical generic Doctor Who monster, there's an interesting through line as Rory looks after Jen. It gives him the chance to be the hero, providing him with personal responsibility and someone else to look after, rather than the episode just leaving him out like a spare part. This storyline also creates a twist in his and Amy's relationship, since she becomes jealous of his closeness with Jen. Not so fun when you're on the other side, is it, Amy? Jokes aside, it is an interesting storyline. Rory has always been in the palm of Amy's hand, doing whatever she says and essentially following her around like a lost puppy. But now things are switched up and Amy has to experience the emotions we saw Rory struggling with in episodes like Vampires of Venice and Day of the Moon. It allows her to see her own relationship with the Doctor through Rory's eyes, providing her with some character development, since she can now empathise with her husband's occasional feelings of jealousy and inferiority, making her appreciate him even more. He spends a lot of the story looking for Jen to keep her safe, which becomes complicated as he comes across two Jens. I love the twist as it turns out both were gangers. This was just part of her plan to kill the humans. Although it doesn't quite make sense considering Jen's whole villain motivation is the abuse of gangers, just for her to turn around and make her own for the sole reason of killing it. I just find that very weird and hypocritical, even if the revelation itself is great. The whole story has been running with the rules of there only being one ganger at a time, so you never consider the possibility that there might actually be more than just one human, one ganger. It's a brilliant reveal. She has been manipulating Rory this whole time, using his trust and kindness against him so that she can use him to destroy his own friends without him realising until it's too late. Rory isn't a very angry or aggressive character, so I love Arthur Darvill's reaction to the betrayal. You can really feel how hurt and outraged he is after being used like this, so Rory has a good role within the two-parter. Because the story is all about trying to broker a peace between the humans and gangers, the Doctor gathers both groups together in one room to hash out their differences and come to an understanding. If this sounds familiar, that's because it's basically the same as Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, and it's even just as boring. I will admit it's cool to see how surreal the experience is for both the gangers and the humans. They have to essentially stare into a mirror and see themselves looking back at them. It's flesh and blood wearing your face, which would understandably freak both groups out. The potential existential crisis is a great concept, yet another good idea lost within the pile of concepts that makes up this two-parter, so it gets lost in the crowd and never really gets explored. Because imagine if one day someone with your face and body was standing across from you, claiming to be you with your personality and your memories. How would that make you feel? Your sense of identity would be sent into chaos. But the story barely explores it and instead turns it into a simple us versus them, with the humans and gangers immediately going back to killing each other. It feels like a waste of time, adding to the dullness of the story. Obviously we're meant to feel the Doctor's frustration at their refusal to work things out, but they were already playing the us and them card, which makes this a boring and genuinely frustrating return to how things were just 5 minutes before. It rewinds things just for the sake of the first part ending on drama. Pretty much the main reason Matthew Graham was given a two-part story was because showrunner Stephen Moffat loved Doctor Who cliffhangers. Therefore, it's unsurprising that the Rebel Flesh tries to have a memorable and earth-shattering cliffhanger as the Ganger Doctor is revealed in all his nightmare-fueled glory. It's definitely memorable, but for all the wrong reasons because it's absolutely cursed. I do like the idea of duplicating the Doctor, especially because it acknowledges how the Flesh struggles to clone a Time Lord with previous regenerations and over 900 years of life. Remember, this is literally the Doctor. A complete identical copy. The only thing that's different are the shoes he's wearing. That's it. It's not the first time the Doctor has been duplicated, but it really fits the story they're telling here because he can connect with the Flesh, feeling all the pain and torment, so he can understand it wants revenge and why. But it is also used for some good comedy, with some fun interplay between the two Doctors. The Doctor has always loved themselves because they're a super intelligent alien with a near infinite knowledge of the entire universe and all of history. It's not surprising then that they'd probably enjoy hanging out with themselves more than anyone else.
You know, I'm starting to get a sense of just how impressive it is to hang out with me.
It also allows for good exposition and technobabble, almost cheating in a way. The Doctor isn't talking to himself, he's talking to himself. Therefore, you get all the problem solving and exposition you'd usually get, but it doesn't feel excessive or annoying because it's just a character talking to another character, so it works within the story itself. An interesting wrinkle in the story is Amy denying the legitimacy of the Ganger Doctor, further showing how complicated and nuanced the whole debate is. She's a protagonist, she's not an evil villain, but even she refuses to consider the Ganger duplicate the same person as the Doctor. He's rightfully hurt by this, because this is his best friend denying his very identity. He has all the same memories. He crashed into a shed. He threw himself into the exploding TARDIS to reboot the universe. He literally is the Doctor. But now he has to stand there and see Amy deny him the right to call himself that. So you can imagine how much that would hurt. Amy has to continually confront her prejudice, because she's wrong to treat the Ganger Doctor differently, not even trusting him to rescue her husband. This prejudice even drives her to reject the real Doctor for his outburst after hearing the tortured screams of hundreds of dying life forms. So in terms of character writing, Amy basically walked right out of a Series 5 episode, proving thoroughly unlikable and just as bad as Cleves, who segregates the Ganger Doctor. Or so they think. Yes, rather cleverly, at the end of the episode there's a brilliant reveal, as it turns out the two Doctors switch shoes to see how the flesh works and truly understand it, along with proving to Amy that both are the same Doctor, although it does mean she accidentally revealed his impending death to him. Oops, I really hate when that happens. I do like how convincing the episode is, completely fooling you into believing that the Ganger Doctor has joined the other Gangers, fully taking advantage of there being a duplicate of the main character. It further validates the Ganger right to live, since we have a proper reference. We know this character incredibly well, and to see how identical they are drives things home for the viewer. Amy herself even acknowledges her mistake, as the Ganger Doctor sacrifices himself to allow the protagonist to escape. Remember, he has all the memories and experiences of the Doctor. He is the Doctor, and that's indisputable. So his sacrifice means a lot, since he knows it's his final death after 900 years of living his life. It's not often that the Doctor can make a big, grand, emotional, I'll hold them back sacrifice, but thanks to the Ganger setup, the story can do that without needing him to regenerate or get saved by some plot contrivance. So it's a nice bow to tie the themes together. However, the most notable part of this story is definitely the very final scene. The absolute groundbreaking reveal as Amy herself is exposed as a Ganger. The way the tone changes is incredible, especially because it seemed like the story was all over, but then it suddenly drops this massive revelation that one of our main characters is actually an imposter, and the actual Amy we've come to know is somewhere completely different, firmly pulling the rug from underneath the viewer and leaving us lost and confused. The Doctor has known all along, which was telegraphed as he kept telling Amy to breathe, because he knew she was actually in labour, finally providing an answer to the ongoing mystery as the TARDIS was unable to confirm or deny Amy's pregnancy, because it was actually scanning her Ganger this entire time. One of my favourite parts about this twist is how it turns out the Doctor came here on purpose. It wasn't an accident. He came here to learn about the flesh, but all along he pretended it was a regular adventure, which shows his darker, more manipulative side, lying to his companions this whole time and hiding his motivations. It's a brilliant twist ending, an emotional swell as the Doctor forces Rory to walk away from the love of his life, something he has consistently refused to do before this point, so him finally leaving her side speaks volumes for the stakes and drama of the moment. The reveal of Amy's childbirth is an incredible cliffhanger, finally paying off all those eye patch lady scenes, but it does feel like a very weird narrative decision to have an entire two-part story all about how the Gangers are alive and have a right to live as humans, only to end it with the Doctor literally assassinating his companion for being one. I know there's a difference because Amy's Ganger is just a vessel, she wasn't like the sentient ones in the storyline, but it still comes across as completely contradicting the entire theme and concept of the two-parter, which is very weird to me. The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People are two episodes full of incredible themes with so much to analyse, but it's not a philosophy thesis weighing up the pros and cons of cloning. It's a piece of media designed to entertain, so it definitely fails on that front because it's not very fun or engaging, unlike Fear Her, which was at least so bad it's good. The pacing is really bad, making the whole story feel like a boring drag that doesn't really justify being a two-parter, especially not immediately after the Doctor's wife, which could have easily filled a two-part slot without missing a beat. This isn't to say this two-parter is without merit though. It does have loads of fascinating concepts. The setting is unique and creative, Rory is used well, and I like how it takes advantage of the flesh to create a duplicate Doctor. The ending is a good lead-in for the mid-series finale, but the process to actually get there just doesn't really feel very engaging or entertaining. I would rate it at a D rank on the Series 6 tier list. Coming off the high of the first few stories, it just feels like such a slog to get through. It wastes so many ideas and concepts, weighing them down with muddled character motivations, barely any character development, and some truly unforgivable CGI. I've never liked this story, and it's a shame because I love it on paper. A story all about rogue clones that explores their right to exist and the horrors they have to experience at the hands of a soulless company, everything culminating in a nuanced, non-black and white revolution led by a monstrous extremist. That's a fantastic Doctor Who concept, and I would love to watch it. Just not like this. This is just so boring and unremarkable. If it wasn't tied so heavily to the Series 6 story arc, the two-parter would be just as forgotten and criticised as something like The Lazarus Experiment. And speaking of, maybe Jen and Lazarus should meet each other. I think they'd get along pretty well. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my Diamond level patron Fallon Cortez, and all my Gold level patrons, Alex Marston, Basil Disco PhD, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn AK Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, Luke_SY, and Stefan Never Miller. Thank you so much for all the support.